Good afternoon. Welcome to the Tennessee edition of our state webinar series, exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a questions section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it from the control panel. You can type your questions and comments then, and we have allowed time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and will send the link to the recording to everyone who is registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin, American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Senior Director of External Relations and is based in Kentucky. Billy is focused on the expansion of AFT's national initiatives across the Southeast. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We believe that saving the land that sustains us means focusing not just on retaining and protecting the agricultural land base, but on the management of that land as well, and on the farmers, ranchers, and landowners who work and live on the land. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from land protection projects to soil health and water quality initiatives, to training service providers to help a new generation of farmers and ranchers gain access to land. Our programming and research inform our state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including the Land Trust for Tennessee, Greater Nashville Regional Council, the Tennessee Clean Water Network, and a number of other organizations and individuals from across the state. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd like to recognize and thank NRCS, especially for their collaboration and support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners.
Great, thank you, Billy. So now let's talk about the findings. Today we're focused on the state of the states, which is the second in this research series. It paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch events in May, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. You'll see here that we looked at a period from 2001 to 2016. This is a period of historically low housing starts with a deep recession in the middle of it. Nonetheless, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. Importantly, more than a third of the land converted, about 4.4 million acres, was what we have identified as nationally significant land. This is land best suited for intensive food and crop production. As you can see from this next map, Tennessee is one of the top 12 most threatened states. In fact, it's number 4 there, you can see. These 12 represent the states with the highest number of acres converted, or the highest percent of acres converted. And you can see that Tennessee is not alone amongst states around the South. So now we're going to dive into the data available for Tennessee on our interactive website, and we will be ably assisted in our cruise through the website by our colleague, Beth Fraser. So thank you, Beth. We're going to start over here with the Reports and Data tab. This is where you'll find fact sheets that describe the methodology used. You'll see the full report. You'll see fact sheets about the scorecard. And if you're interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, you can click on this Geospatial Data Layers tab that Beth is pointing out. It will take you to a form to fill out requesting the data, and we will be back in touch to let you know what is available and when it is available. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and choose Tennessee. It's going to take you to where you can find both the spatial data for the state and the policy scorecard. And we're going to start with pointing out this conversion summary downloadable PDF down here on the left. And we point this out to show folks that it is a useful 2-pager, easily downloadable for those who have bandwidth challenges, as many of us do. It's got a host of wonderful graphics of useful information, and we hope you all will make use of it to use it with policymakers, and that's both at the state level and at the county level, with journalists, for your newsletters, any number of uses for that document. So we hope you will make use of it. There is also an equivalent one on the policy side that we hope you will download as well. So now let's turn to the 4 different types of data layers that we have on this website, starting with land cover and use. We used multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the US. You can zoom in on this data layer, as you can see Beth moving around, to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low-density residential development. And all that orange is low-density residential development, and the dark red is considered urban areas. It also includes the first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm. So our mapping shows 12.3 million acres of agricultural land, including 4.5 million acres of cropland, 4 million acres of pasture, and 3.7 million acres of woodland associated with farms. So moving now to PVR values, we wanted for this project to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the PVR value. And the higher the PVR value, the higher the suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. These PVR values were then used to identify nationally significant land. This next map shows where that nationally significant agricultural land is in Tennessee. There are about 4.45 million acres in this category, which is more than a third of the state's agricultural land base. About 2.7 million acres of this is cropland, with 1.1 million acres in pasture and 709,000 acres in woodland. And lastly, we're going to look at conversion. Again, we looked at the 15-year period from 2001 to 2016, and we mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land use. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas, largely found in cities and towns, but it also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, so it does pick up oil and well pads and large-scale solar installations. The second type is low-density residential development, which we've labeled LDR. This is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. More than 2/3 of conversion in Tennessee over this time frame, almost 511,000 acres, was to LDR. And a note about low-density residential land use. There may be active agriculture on some land designated as LDR, and some of that small parcel production may be productive and profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Tennessee that was considered LDR in 2001 was 8 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who end up farming in and around non-farm neighbors. So total agricultural land converted over this 15-year period was 659,000 acres. Pasture conversion accounted for the most with 291,000 acres, followed by woodlands with 201,000 acres, followed by cropland with 166,000 acres. And in looking at the quality of the land converted, about 32% of the land is considered land that is nationally significant. The loss of this especially productive land is concerning from several perspectives. As producers are forced to more marginal land, input costs tend to go up and crop yields tend to go down. The loss also creates more pressure to convert woodlots, pasture, and buffer strips to cropland. So reducing conversion to development is critical to making progress on water quality and wildlife habitat goals. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Billy and Beth for some additional perspectives and looking around on the spatial findings.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to call your attention again to the red on the map. So the red that you're seeing is all the farmland that's been converted over a 15-year period ending in 2016, and the gray being urbanized areas. So I think what we're seeing here in Tennessee is quite a bit of conversion along the interstate corridors, along I-65 and I-75. And what we're seeing is significant fragmentation of agriculture in eastern Tennessee, in the Chattanooga, Knoxville, Kingsport, and Bristol corridor. So we can see there significant conversion to low density residential. And I think it's important to note here the spectrum of development. So you start with farmland, and some of it's converted to low density residential, which is already compromising your agricultural areas. And the more low density residential you have, it eventually becomes urban high density development. So we'll touch a little bit more on the suite of tools for good planning and planning for the future of agriculture later. Nashville, I think, is another example of significant expansion and conversion of farmland. And we're going to look at perhaps some of the reasons why as we discuss policy. But Tennessee has a significant amount of productive, versatile, and resilient land, high quality farmland. And this is a call to action to conserve that farmland now. Back to you, Chris.
Great, thank you, Billy. So now we're going to turn to the policy scorecard. Our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address the traditional drivers of agricultural land conversion. So poorly planned development, weak agricultural viability, and the vulnerability of land when it transfers between generations. While AFT has been deeply involved in federal and state agriculture and conservation policy since our founding, this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. We know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. Programs that focus on marketing, that focus on exports, that focus on business development. Many states and state departments of agriculture specifically offer a wide range of programs and support for things like cooperative extension. All of those are important and are particularly important in addressing that agricultural viability, because we understand that it's not farmland without farmers, and that profitable farm businesses are one of the best ways to keep agricultural land in production. So we say all of that to say that we understand there's lots of ways that states support agriculture. We have focused on six different types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land and address one or more of these conversion drivers. So the six ones you see here, see them on the left: purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, often known as purchase of development right, PDR programs. These voluntary programs permanently protect farmland and rangeland from non-farm development. They compensate landowners who choose to place a permanent agricultural conservation easement on their property. We looked at land use planning and growth management. So most states, including Tennessee, delegate planning authority to local governments, and planning and zoning decisions are driven largely at the county and municipal level. As Billy will discuss, local governments need a suite of effective tools to support compact development and retain agricultural land. States, though, can play an active and important role in guiding local planning and supporting local governments with the right tools and incentives to stabilize the agricultural land base. And so we looked at what states are doing in that regard. We looked at property tax relief programs. These are ones that reduce property taxes paid on agricultural land in recognition that working lands require far less municipal services than the taxes typically levied on them. So Tennessee's Greenbelt law is the one we looked at here. On agricultural districts, 16 districts, including Tennessee, have district programs which encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. Protection and incentives provided to farmers in these districts vary by state, and we'll talk a little bit more when we get to Tennessee. FarmLink programs. There are 10 states that have a state-supported and run FarmLink program. There are many more administered by other types of entities around the country. These programs seek to connect farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture, and they can offer a range of services and resources, from online real estate postings to technical assistance, trainings, and educational resources. As you'll see, we did not include the Tennessee Farm Link here. We understand that it's a web tool developed by the Appalachian Resource Conservation and Development Council in partnership with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, and that's great. It's lovely to see that. But we just want to mention that here because the programs that we included are only those that are managed by a state department of agriculture. And lastly, we looked at state leasing programs. So those that make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Sometimes that's their primary purpose. More often though, agricultural use is secondary to generating income for a public purpose or for protecting wildlife habitat. So here you now see how Tennessee scores relative to other states. Again, it has 4 of the 6 types of policies we scored, again, recognizing that it is involved in somewhat in FarmLink, but it is above the median on planning, on property tax, and on state leasing, and below the median on ag districts. And what I want to point out here is the states with the highest policy responses, those dark blue scores, are states that have faced rapid loss of farmland for decades, and they've had little choice but to respond aggressively. As Tennessee now feels this development pressure more intently, it will similarly need to increase its policy response if it hopes to retain its land base for a profitable agricultural industry. So now we're going to look at a few of the details behind each of these policies. So here you would go to the Select Policy and Program tab, and we're going to start with land use planning. And as we start here, Beth, if you would go to the bottom just to show folks that they can, in fact, see how we scored it. And it gives you a sense of what were the components in each one of these categories and how many points they got for them. It also recognizes that the scale is weighed in particular ways, and it talks more about that as well. But on land use planning, Tennessee gets points here for requiring local governments to prepare comprehensive plans if a planning commission is formed. It also gets points for requiring counties that create urban growth boundaries to manage and control expansion outside these boundaries, taking into account impact to agricultural land. Higher scoring states in this category have state goals around retaining their farmland and or promoting compact development, and then incentivize or require consistency between these state goals and local plans. Some other states provide support or incentives to local governments to develop farmland protection plans and strategies. So now let's look at property tax relief, or Tennessee's Greenbelt program. Here, Tennessee gets points for having a minimum income requirement for participation in the program, as well as for having a rollback tax. In some states, these rollback taxes are used to fund local farmland protection efforts. Tennessee, you can see on the acres enrolled where it loses points also on this far right is the 0 on acres enrolled. It does not appear that Tennessee tracks the number of acres enrolled at the state level. We believe that tracking of this type of information is extremely valuable to understanding the usefulness of this program to farmers. So looking now at Tennessee's agricultural districts, this is a program that gets some points for protections it affords landowners in a district, and it gets some points for requiring that local planning authorities know about the district. But there does not appear to be much of an incentive for landowners to create districts, and the number of districts or the amount of acreage is not tracked. So it's tough to know how widely the program is used. And then lastly, let's look at state leasing. So we know that as of 2019, Tennessee's Wildlife Resources Agency leases approximately 17,000 acres through its share crop lease program. And it gets good points across the board, again, in terms of having lease terms that are appropriate for agriculture, having a fairly transparent application process. Where it doesn't get full points is under this assessment category, because it's not clear that the state has identified any other lands it owns outside of those managed through the share crop lease program. We see value in a state taking a full inventory of land they own to identify potential opportunities for land leasing, especially for new, young, and historically underserved producers. And we think this is especially important in a state like Tennessee, where there are 5 times as many producers over 65 as under the age of 35. So let me just say mention about easements, while Tennessee does not have a PACE program, I do want to talk about the importance of federal matching funds for working lands protection through both USDA's Agricultural Conservation Easement Program and the Agricultural Land Easements Sub-Program within that, as well as through USDA's Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Both of these are administered by the Natural Resources Conservation Service. It looks like Tennessee has made some use of AL funding. We hope that the increased funding for both these programs, plus additional statutory flexibility, will increase their use in Tennessee. A couple of the ACEP changes, so the elimination of the cash match requirement and new authority for buy, protect, sell projects, we think will be especially valuable. And the National Agricultural Land Network will be reaching out to partners around the Southeast later this summer to focus on ways to increase utilization of these programs. So I hope that was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you do have questions, please write them down. And as we go out of the website, we're going to mention one data layer that was not included here in the other data layers, and this is protected agricultural land. There was no national data layer available for protected farm and ranch land specifically. And so we are building that data layer right now. I can see, this is great to see that there is some green showing up in Tennessee. So we know we have information from some partners in Tennessee about their protected land. But if you are an entity in the state that holds agricultural conservation easements and you have not yet heard from us, please write your name and the organization name in the question panel, and we will be back in touch because we want to be sure that we get all of the data out there. And with that, I think that I should stop, Billy, and take any questions.
Thanks, Chris. We have a lot of good questions here, and I'll take these one by one. The first question is, why does it seem that so often the best quality agricultural land gets lost to low density residential and other development types? And I'll say that this is a perfect question for this data. We are not planning for the future of agriculture, and this is not unique to Tennessee, but ideally planning would occur in a way that protects the best soils for agriculture and moves development to the more marginal soils. And I'll also say that, oftentimes those that are interested in living in the rural area where we see low density residential development, be it 2 acres, 5 acres, 10 acres, 15 acres, or 20 acres, those folks want to live in the rural area for a reason, but that's not necessarily meaning that they have a viable agricultural unit with their lot. So these non-agricultural lots are being used on our best soils, and that's our research is bearing that out. And I'm going to get to that next point as we move through these questions. The next question is, how extensive is gentleman or hobby farming in Tennessee? Well, 78% of the conversion of acreage between 2001 and 2016, or 510,900 acres, was to low density residential development. So I would say it's significant. I think this is a very high number. Can anything be done about the fact that development is almost continuous from Nashville to Rutherford to Columbia and Nashville to Lebanon? Oh, the correction was Nashville to Murfreesboro. And so here, I'll say generally, I'll speak broadly and specifically, broadly speaking, we see a proliferation of development like we're seeing in Tennessee, which is not unique in the nation. There are other states, many others, that are facing these same issues. but it's because there's not uniform planning in metropolitan areas and in smaller municipalities and counties. So there must be a uniform planning process, a planning process that includes planning commissions and professional planning staffs that guide development in the future. And that you have a comprehensive planning process that's updated every 5 years or so to take a look at the development and the conservation patterns in that area. Another thing I'll say is that if you have a situation in these communities where annexation is allowed outside of the comprehensive planning process, then that also will result in a proliferation of low density residential development and urban high density, because when annexation is allowed outside of the comprehensive planning update process, which typically occurs, every 5 years or so, your comprehensive plan becomes meaningless. Because if annexation is occurring in an ad hoc manner, it's undermining your comprehensive planning process, because it's not occurring, it's not allowing for a broad community process where the entire community weighs in over an 18-month, 12 to 18-month period to form that plan where you're looking at it. And I'm not saying that this is happening in every situation. I'm just saying that annexation occurring outside the comprehensive plan process can lead to this type of proliferation. So I think that was our last question. I'll move on to our next slide here to provide some additional information. So time is not on our side in saving our farm and ranch land, which is why American Farmland Trust just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. We know that to get to this goal, that we will need to lock arms with the many partners and practitioners on this call and others around the U.S., all who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. And now I'd like to move forward and discuss some of the ways that American Farmland Trust will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection across the country and the South especially. So establishing the National Agricultural Land Network, I know that Chris has mentioned that, and she's going to go into that in detail in just a minute or so. Providing new leadership in key locations, American Farmland Trust is in the exploration process and opening a couple of new offices in the Southeast that will expand our national initiatives to areas with the greatest need. Protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners, we want to partner with the existing boots on the ground there with local PACE programs, PDR programs, and with state entities to conserve more farmland. Advocate for stronger state and federal policies. American Farmland Trust has an entire federal policy team that's always focused on working on the Farm Bill and federal policies that impact agriculture and farmland protection. American Farmland Trust also supports state legislation that aligns with our mission, and we are continually approached by state level stakeholders to ask for our support on legislation that helps protect farmland, keep farmers on the land, and implement stronger farming practices. And so we also are willing to go meet with state officials with you and to bring our data with us and to bring a national perspective to those conversations. And we also want to promote research-based decision making, which the question that was asked earlier was a perfect segue for this point, that using our data and using research to make decisions about planning for the future of agriculture is critically important. and the future of growth. And this is not a no growth proposal. Growth and farmland protection go hand in glove, and it's about approaching those two policies in a parallel track, in a uniform way. And now we'll move to our next slide. So what more can Tennessee do? Analyze and map agricultural land trends and conditions. So this also goes back to the question that was asked about why do we have low density residential development and other types of development on the best land in Tennessee. So this, use our microsite, use our research, map these trends, and they will inform your planning decisions. Strengthening or adopting a coordinated suite of policies. Well, we know that Tennessee authorizes comprehensive plans in communities with planning commissions, but it's really critical that metropolitan areas and associated municipalities and counties have professional planners and planning commissions to guide the future of your smart growth and your farmland protection. Having appointed officials that have a specific role in planning for the future are really the best. That's really the best approach. Having urban growth boundaries in your smaller communities. This also goes back to one of the questions, not just in your larger areas, but your smaller communities, which can expand through annexation and merge with other smaller communities. That has been an issue across the nation. But to also make your urban growth boundaries stand as something that really holds growth in, so that you are focused on infill and redevelopment, and you're making your downtown areas more vibrant and not annexing outside of that boundary, which also means you're going to have to develop everything that's inside of that boundary to grow in a compact, contiguous manner. We also recommend agricultural zonings in your rural areas. So you have zoning in your rural areas that prohibits non-agricultural uses and supports agricultural, agribusiness, and agritourism uses. And then, of course, farmland protection. Every county should have a goal for farmland protection. Supporting farm viability and access to land, planning for agriculture. That's what we've been talking about with the questions that were asked, and not just around it, but actually planning for agriculture. The economic impacts of agriculture bear out planning for agriculture. 3.8 billion in cash farm receipts in Tennessee, 1.5 billion in agricultural exports, over 114,000 producers, and over 45,000 farm laborers in Tennessee. So clearly, there's a need to plan for agriculture. Saving the best, but don't forget the rest. And when we get to this point in the presentation, I like to talk about conserving our productive, versatile, and resilient farmland, our nationally significant farmland, but also considering how we're going to plan for our more marginal farmland. And this, in other southern states, this has been a point to discuss, solar siting, using more marginal lands for renewable energy uses. So at this point in the presentation, I would like to turn it back over to Chris.
Great. Thank you so much, Billy. That was really helpful. We have a couple more questions, so let's go to those before I talk about our resources. One is, what is the significance of the minimum income requirement for some of these programs? And I think this was probably a reference to the property tax relief program, where it is a component of the scorecard. The reason for why we included that minimum income requirement is to be sure that this property tax relief is going to bona fide producers and wanting to show sort of meaningful income from the land is certainly one way to do that. There are a number of states that do say you simply need to prove that you are producing something that don't have income thresholds. I think we feel that those income thresholds are more important as a way of really ensuring that there is a minimum amount of production. And as we think about it, and as states have been thinking about how do you get access to more land for more producers, there's actually been discussion in some places about increasing those income thresholds as a way, if you have a non-operating landowner, of potentially encouraging that landowner to be working with a farmer on more active agriculture on that land. So that's sort of the rationale on the minimum income requirements. There's another question here about the data, and the questioner actually makes a point of saying that the data stops at 2016, and that since 2016, some Tennessee cities, such as Nashville and Memphis, have really boomed and spread even further. And do we have any more recent data than 2016? The answer is no, not right at this moment, but it is a good opportunity for us to talk about the next phase of farms under threat. So Billy, do you want to do that?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, I'd welcome that opportunity. So Farms Under Threat is a three-phase project. The first phase, which was released in May of 18, was a historic national look back. This phase is a current state of the states, state by state in 48 states. The third phase will project out to 2040. It's a look into the future. We are looking at housing densities, population increases, and climate change, and their potential impacts on farmland loss and how we can mitigate those impacts now. So it's the perfect opportunity for us to address projecting out what things are going to look like in the future, and we're going to be doing these on a county level. So there have been a lot of questions about Nashville, and candidly, I live less than an hour north of Nashville, and it's a way to look at counties on a regional level. So how to plan on a regional level for the future of agriculture. And it's not just, again, not unique to Nashville or Tennessee. States that have that have one or two interstates running through them, those counties that have interstate interchanges are subject to this type of growth. And so projecting into the future will allow us to look at this on a county by county basis with the most current data. That process has already started. And so we're looking forward to that next phase. I was communicating with my colleague who's the director of that project, and I think we can start looking for that data sometime late in 2022. And everyone on this call will certainly be made aware of that as we continue to move forward.
Great, thank you. This next question, and it's the last one we have, you touched on it some, but let me pose it so that you have a chance to say anything more if you would like. Do you
Sure.
think that a metro government such as Nashville and Davidson County is beneficial for integrated land use planning?
Generally, I'll say, as everyone knows, or I hope they know, American Farmland Trust is a nonpartisan research and science organization. So we would not. It's not our role to say someone is right or wrong. We're simply presenting the data and letting folks make their own decisions based on the data. So I'll say here that generally a best practice is to have a merged city-county planning function. It works much better when the city and county is working together in unison on how they can plan for the future. Now, it works differently in different areas, but generally, I'll say that they work very well together. I'll end by saying that they work far better than having numerous planning processes taking place across a county. So if you have a city that has a merge planning function, and then you have smaller municipalities that may not have their own planning staff, or counties that may not have their own planning staff that are deferring to regional economic development entities or other entities to plan for the future. It's not a holistic approach to planning. So I would just say the more you can consolidate your planning function for a unified vision for the future. And, having a unified vision for the future of what your community or your city is going to look like is critically important, because cities compete against each other for talent, for businesses, for conventions, for tourists. So these are very important decisions. And I'll just add that American Farmland Trust has done over 80 cost of community services studies across the United States. And you can go to farmlandinfo.org, type in cost of community services in the search field, and read those studies. And generally, they all say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and ag uses less in services than it pays in taxes, and your core urban areas are using even less. And so the message there is that it's really important to develop in a compact, contiguous manner to reduce the long-term costs to the taxpayer. The more communities sprawl out, the more expensive it is to the taxpayer. And so even though your ag and your core urban areas are creating a net gain on the tax dollar, sprawl is exceeding that gain. So it's not sustainable financially, and it's not sustainable environmentally either.
Great. Thank you, Billy. Now, since we are done with questions, we're going to finish with just a couple of words about these two resources that American Farmland Trust is offering. The first is the Farmland Information Center. And that is a collaboration that we've had with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service for decades. It's a national clearinghouse on information about agricultural land protection. It is both useful for professionals in the field, but it is equally useful for landowners and farmers and ranchers. For farmers, ranchers, landowners, the resources include information about where to look and who they might be able to partner with on protecting their land. So there's a farmland protection directory in there. There's a lot of great information about what are agricultural conservation easements. How do they differ from straight old conservation easements? What do you want to think about when you're protecting your land? What types of tax incentives are there for land protection? And we are about to put up additional resources around the agricultural conservation easement program. One of these is a fact sheet for landowners that talks about the benefits to participating in the program. There's increasingly a lot of resources around land access as well, and where to go for farm links. And so I believe that Tennessee's Farm Link program is in that resource directory as well. So for professionals, there's a lot of great information about state policies. There's a lot of statistical information. So I encourage everybody to go to the website, farmlandinfo.org. You can ask an expert a question through there, or you can use this 800 number, and people do answer the phone, and they are a wealth of information about any question you might have about agricultural land protection. The National Agricultural Land Network is a very recent addition in our technical assistance and peer networking suite. It is intended to build the collective capacity of all of those around the country who are working in this arena, and that's both permanent protection and planning to retain the agricultural land base. It is intended to provide both networking and information sharing around the country and by region. So we hope to have a combination of both national topical webinars, topical conversations, and also to have a number of regional forums focused on more specific, more geographically specific challenges and opportunities. So I should say that one of the next things the network is going to be doing is hosting a series of policy webinars that are going to go deep into the policy scorecard and looking at each of these types of policies and those that are at the top of the board in terms of having what we felt were the most robust policies in a particular area, understanding what they are doing, how they've done it, and how everyone else can learn from them. So look for that information about that policy webinar series beginning in the early fall. And I hope that people will sign up for the network, which is open to folks who are working on land protection or on planning. The network is free. If you have any questions, please be in touch with me. My email is here, or my phone number is here as well. So with that, I will turn it back over to Billy to close us out.
Thank you, Chris. American Farmland Trust thanks you for joining this webinar today. We are here to help you, and we are a resource. So I'm available at bvanpelt@farmland.org. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And again, we thank you for your time today, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Have a nice afternoon.